Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening.
Many people recognized that he was the head of the Ellison family, Thomas Ellison. They all stared blankly with their mouths open wide. They did not understand why he would come over in person just to listen to what they were talking about. But that did not stop them from doubting Nicole. Mr. Kennedy had heard what the other teachers had to say. As he saw Mr. Ellison coming over, he thought he was interested in the discussion, so he tried to flatter him and said, "Mr. Ellison, you're here. We were discussing the relationship between Nicole and Mr. Wyance. All of us are highly suspicious that this has something to do with why she got first place in the math Olympiad. We suspect that she knew the question beforehand. Otherwise, how could she have gotten full marks with her level in math?" After he said this, he looked at Mr. Ellison confidently and waited for him to agree. Many teachers were also looking at Mr. Ellison. They knew that the head of Royal Creek Institute was upright and honest. He would hate Nicole after hearing about this, they thought. Ms. Emerson knew that she could not let Mr. Kennedy smear Nicole's name in front of the head of the school. "It's not like that, Mr. Ellison. Nicole would never." Before she could finish her words, she was interrupted by Vivian. "Ms. Emerson, I'm afraid you don't know the real Nicole. That goody two-shoes made a personal attack on me this morning and even threatened to kill me. I'm not surprised that she would cheat. After all, she did make a bet with Mr. Kennedy." After she finished speaking, she turned to look at Gary. She was thrilled that her statement had got him thinking. Now that I have exposed Nicole's true identity, Gary will definitely not pay any more attention to Nicole. Vivian proudly lifted her head and looked toward Mr. Ellison at the side. She thought her words would make him feel bad about Nicole, but he was looking at her with a cold gaze. He did not know who she was. Mr. Kennedy also noticed Mr. Ellison's expression and quickly said, "Mr. Ellison, this is Nicole's class monitor. She knows everything that goes on in the class very well. Hence, she should know about Nicole's character. I think it is certain that Nicole cheated in the math Olympiad." Mr. Kennedy was trying to seek approval from Mr. Ellison with those words. However, he only heard one thing from his mouth. "Enough." He looked at Mr. Ellison in shock. He had never heard such a furious roar from him before. He was always gentle and soft-spoken. Gary was also surprised at his reaction. He did not expect the head of the school to get mad at Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Ellison glanced at Mr. Kennedy and Vivian with an angered expression. Even the teachers from other schools who were bad-mouthing Royal Creek Institute started to quiet down. Everything fell silent. Mr. Ellison closed his eyes to suppress his anger. "You all enjoy running your mouths, huh? Mr. Kennedy, do you always go around and indiscriminate your students? What right do you have to say that Nicole cheated?" After that, he turned to look at the students from Class B. The disappointment in his eyes was overflowing when he saw Vivian. I don't understand why you hate your own classmate so much. Your words could ruin someone's life, do you know that? If this is how you have been treating Nicole, I'd say you deserve everything she has done to you." Vivian's eyes widened when Mr. Ellison defended Nicole. Her eyes and cheeks were getting red at how merciless his words were. Mr. Ellison's eyes filled with disgust when he saw that she was about to cry. He was not impressed. He had met a lot of girls like her. They always regard the other party as their enemy without any particular reason and ruin their lives with their big mouths, he thought. He looked around the room coldly and said, "Nicole's results have been reviewed by the Olympiad Committee. She indeed got full marks. As for her relationship with Sebastian Wyance, they know each other because she had helped him before. I am here to let you know that it is not what you all think. It is not hard to admit that you are not as good as other people. You are upset because of Nicole's excellence. Let go of your prejudices and open your eyes. You will see that Nicole is actually an admirable person." He gave Gary a meaningful look and continued slowly, "Nicole's paper was personally verified by me and Declan Hancock, who is from Northern Institute. The problem-solving steps she took to get the answers were ingenious. There is no doubt that she is first in place. If you don't believe me, ask Mr. Hancock for yourselves." After he said this, He glanced at Ms. Emerson with admiration. "You are a good teacher, and I thank you on behalf of Nicole," he said. Then, Mr. Ellison looked over to Mr. Kennedy, who was trembling in fear. "Mr. Kennedy, come with me." Mr. Kennedy felt as if he had been struck by lightning. He looked at Mr. Ellison with a horrified expression. He suddenly remembered that when school started, Ms. Farrell had brought Nicole to Royal Creek Institute and asked her to choose between him and Ms. Emerson. How can someone from Great Oak have the power to choose a teacher she preferred? Now that I think about it, it may be because of Mr. Ellison. Vivian's face turned pale as she saw the two walk out. She did not think that Mr. Ellison and Declan Hancock would verify the results of Nicole's paper. Now, no matter how much she tried to slander Nicole, it would be no use. How could this be? How could she get first place in the math Olympiad? She was just some random person that was taken in by the Riddle family. How could she possess so much power? She thought. Ms. Emerson shook her head in disappointment as she looked at Vivian, who stood beside her. "You weren't like this before, Vivian," she said with a hint of hatred in her voice. "She is no longer the motivated, intelligent, and just Vivian. She is no longer suitable to be the class monitor." Ms. Emerson shook her head again. She ignored the teachers who were coming up to her and walked out of the hall. Many of the girls from Class B looked at Vivian in disgust after hearing Mr. Ellison's words. They had heard Vivian slander Nicole countless times. But now, they were questioning if their opinions were based on facts or Vivian's assumptions. Not long after, they decided to distance themselves from Vivian. None of them wanted to be associated with someone who would tarnish the name of their own classmate. Vivian watched as everyone pushed her away. She then looked at Rain in anger. "It's all your fault. I was obviously just stating what you said to me. Why is no one talking about you?" Vivian shouted at Rain. Nora knew that something big would happen, so she left quietly. Fortunately for her, Vivian did not recognize her. Hence, she did not remember that it was Nora who told her about Nicole. Rain, who was taking the blame for Nora, hid behind Gary. She was about to say something, but when she saw Mr. Ellison, she decided to stay silent. She remembered that Mr. Ellison was the one who personally handled Nicole's admission into Royal Creek Institute. Thus, she was not ready to get caught in the crosshairs. After all, it was Vivian's fault for not knowing her place. Vivian glanced at Rain hiding behind Gary with mockery in her eyes. She angrily rushed toward Rain and stretched out her hands to scratch her. "You coward! How dare you hide behind Gary?" Rain was not going to let Vivian hurt her. She ducked to the other side, but it was too late for Vivian to stop. Vivian screamed as she saw that she was about to hurt Gary. On the other hand, Gary was not paying attention to the fight between the two girls. He was still thinking about what Mr. Ellison had said. "Is it true I can't accept that Nicole is better than me?" As he was deep in thought, he heard a shout. "Gary! Look out!" What? Gary was brought back to earth by that shout. He saw a hand coming toward him and quickly grabbed it. However, Vivian still left a mark on his face. Gary was in pain. He did not expect that a girl could hurt him. He looked at Vivian in front of him and threw her hand aside coldly. "What are you doing?" he said in anger. Vivian did not think that her actions would hurt Gary. She stood there at a loss and stretched out her hand to touch his face. "Gary, I didn't mean it. I just wanted to deal with her." Suddenly, she turned to look at Rain and shouted, "You did this on purpose." There was a hint of innocence on Rain's face. She did not anticipate that Gary would get hurt if she ducked. "This is not what I want. What nonsense are you spouting? How could I do it on purpose?" Vivian's eyes were red when she noticed Gary looking at her in disgust. "It was you. You deliberately made Gary hate me so that you can have him for yourself," she shouted. Gary's patience was running thin when he heard this. He grabbed Vivian's outstretched hand and said, "Stop it. I've had enough of your nonsense." After that, he turned around to leave the hall. Jack and Wayne on the side quickly ran up to him and gave him a teasing look. "I didn't expect to see you still look as good as ever, Gary." The two girls were jealous of each other, not sure which one of them Gary favored most. He had a frosty face as he looked at Jack with no emotion and asked him to go away. As Jack rubbed his chin and ran after Gary to apologize, Wayne glanced at Jack and thought to himself that Jack was dumb. Seeing the two zealous girls, he felt just as annoyed as Gary. This was the last kind of girl he wanted. Gary, Mr. Ellison has said it, Nicole is first. How did she do that? He asked slowly. Even Gary has only gotten second place. Nicole is simply nature-defying. Did Nicole really not cheat? No way she is this smart, Jack said suspiciously. Gary looked back at the two of them for the first time in all seriousness. Don't taunt anyone like this next time. Nicole achieved it by her own merit. I've got to admit that she is better than me. With that, he strode away from the Royal Creek Institute without looking back, leaving Wayne and Jack standing in place, looking at each other. They both felt strange thinking about what Gary had said. Nicole had indeed made Class B proud. Both of them were a bit confused. Jack saw a cafe from the corner of his eye and patted Wayne on the shoulder. Let's grab a cup of coffee and calm down inside. Gary had spoken, and it seemed that they would really have to change their minds about Nicole. The two men muttered as they walked into the cafe. Claus was sitting idly inside at the time. When he saw the two customers walk in, he casually greeted them. What would you like, sir? Jack looked at Claus and had an inexplicable feeling that he had seen him before. But he did not give it a second thought. He randomly ordered something and sat down with Wayne on the other side. Claus looked at the two men with interest. While making the coffee, he overheard the conversation between Jack and Wayne mentioning Nicole. Are these two guys Nicole's classmates? Claus secretly replaced the middle cup size too large and brought them to Jack and Wayne. Again, he heard them talk about Nicole winning the math Olympiad competition. Good Lord, it seems that Nicole's pen-spinning trick really works. Claus had a faint look of pride on his face. As he put down the coffee, Jack and Wayne complained he had given them the wrong cup sizes. But he ignored them, walked back to the counter, and called his boss, telling him that Nicole had won first place. Jared's reaction was nonchalant. He just muttered an acknowledgement, seemingly not surprised at all. The phone went dead from Jared's side. Claus smirked at hearing Jared's response, which seemed to act cool. Nevertheless, he had to admit that his boss really knew Nicole well. When everyone was doubting Nicole, Jared had stood firmly by her side. During the live auction of the Wyance Group's land, Luke McCarthy, the representative from the McCarthy family, was looking triumphantly at Sean and Steve across from him. He already had a chin wag with many people at the tender venue and was acquainted with Taylor Wyatt and George Allen. Both were government officials. They now held all the cards and were expected to win the tender. He looked at the stone-faced Sean with disdain. No matter how good an offer is, relationships are the last word. I will certainly be able to win the bid and then build a hospital on that land, making a ton of money out of those fools. Just like Michael, the CEO of San Joto Central Hospital, I will soon be able to multiply my net worth by dozens of times. Luke had a greedy look on his face, excited when he thought of the money he was going to get. He swaggered up to Sean, rolled up his tender documents, and knocked it on the table. Don't you know better, brat, that you should at least say hello? He wanted to intimidate the young man. If the young man took the hint, he should quickly get up and butter him up. Then he would not let him lose so badly. But he was destined to be disappointed, as Sean did not even spare a look at Luke but just smacked the rolled-up tender documents aside and then ignored this arrogant competitor. Steve nudged the gold-framed glasses up his nose and looked at Luke with a frosty look in his eyes. The bidding will start soon, Mr. McCarthy. Why don't you take a little look-see at your tender presentation instead of wasting time looking for trouble with us? Luke had been treated so unceremoniously by a youngster. He looked furiously at Sean and Steve, but soon, as if something dawned on him, he sneered, looking at those VIPs with whom he had spent a lot of money to rub shoulders. Guys, you won't believe how naive these kids are. They think they can win the tender by just preparing the presentation well. What do they have to compete with me? Many people also looked at Sean and Steve with mockery. Steve frowned with anger and disgust at Luke. Can you win with your tricks without real skills? Luke could not stand it when he heard this. But before he could say anything, Taylor, who had received a lot of benefits from Luke, chimed in with displeasure. You know nothing, do you? What nonsense. We who are all here know how capable Mr. McCarthy is. How dare a brat like you become boastful here? George also shook his head, looking at the Riddle family with a hint of derision in his eyes. They really think that they can win the tender with just their youthful spirit? These two guys really know nothing, do they? Mr. Wyance will surely take the opinions of the surrounding people into consideration. Can they still win if everyone has a negative view of the Riddle family? But there were also many people who sympathized with Steve and Sean, knowing that the two had made a lot of preparations, but just judging by what Luke could do, they all felt sorry and looked away. In the minds of these people, the Riddle family was most likely going to lose. Steve frowned and wanted to say something upon hearing what Taylor had said. But Sean grabbed his hand and gently shook his head at him as if telling him to be patient. Luke looked at everyone's expressions and then snorted at Sean and said aloud, "I've come prepared. If not for the formality, I wouldn't have come, and you all might not have even got to see my face. I know that the Riddle family is in decline now the moment I see you. Do you really think that you can get this land by hard work alone like before? I tell you what, you don't get a chance." Luke had just finished speaking triumphantly when the door of the conference room suddenly opened, with Sebastian and Moen slowly walking in. Seeing Sebastian, Luke hurriedly greeted him, his eyes smiling servilely into slits. Sebastian felt like frowning at the extremely ingratiating Luke. But he did not show his emotion, just perfunctorily acknowledging him. In Luke's eyes, it was an endorsement. Luke's face glowed, and he almost walked on air, looking at Sean and Steve with contempt in his eyes. These two idiots are waiting to lose. Sean and Steve also nodded at Sebastian with just the right amount of humbleness, which scored them a lot of points in Sebastian's eyes. Looking closely, these two young men seemed to look a little like Nicole. Especially those slightly upturned eyes that looked a little frosty and haughty. How could I not have found out earlier? Sebastian's gaze was considered by many people around him as a sign of his unhappiness toward the Riddles. They all looked at the two with disdain. Look, even the gentle Mr. Wyance does not like them. Sebastian and Moen sat in the first row in the middle, and Sebastian glanced faintly at the two families on both sides and said casually, "Let's get started." Luke preemptively started his performance, praising Sebastian for 10 minutes in his tender documents, and finally mentioned a few words about his planning for the land. Not only Sebastian but even Merwin frowned. What is going on with the McCarthy family? They seem to have shown some good ideas in the first round, but during the second round when Luke, who was the person in charge of the McCarthy family, took over, his performance was not as good as the assistant. Taylor, who was next to Sebastian, said, "Mr. McCarthy is very dedicated, and his presentation is awesome." Sebastian glanced at Taylor and said nothing. Taylor was here just as an observer who had no right to speak. I didn't expect to see Taylor put in a good word for Luke here. It looks like the McCarthy family has spent a lot of money on him. Merwin looked at Taylor with a smirk. "Oh, really? It looks like you have a sharp eye." Taylor chortled, but he could not tell if Sebastian was happy. Sebastian had always shown little feeling, so no one knew what he was thinking. But since Sebastian did not refute what he said, Taylor thought Sebastian was quite satisfied. Taylor felt smug as Luke occupied the stage for another few more minutes, repeating his determination for the land, and then took a defiant look at Sean before he finally got off the stage. Sean was not bothered by Luke. He picked up his presentation document and gave Sebastian and everyone else a copy. Then he and Steve stood in the center of the stage with confidence. Here's the content of Riddle Corporation's tender document. Subsequently, Sean went all out to present his plan for the land and analyzed the project. Looking at the Riddle brothers on stage, Sebastian finally understood why Nicole asked him to be fair. Because the Riddle brothers were slightly better from a purely fair point of view. He supported the Riddle family, not just because of Nicole. An hour had passed, and the dust had settled. Coming out of the conference room dumbfounded, Luke could not believe that he had lost. He looked at Taylor and then caught up with him, asking, "What was going on? Didn't you say that you would help me? How could the brats win?" Taylor had a dilemmatic look on his face. Taylor had just been warned. He could have lost his job if Sebastian had told the higher-ups in the government about his relationship with the McCarthy family. He risked that for Luke, yet Luke was blaming him. He looked not too happy. How can you still have the nerve to say this? What the hell have you presented? You've only spent a few seconds on the tender, yet complain that I haven't helped you. This is ridiculous. I have been warned by Mervyn for helping you. I'm not going to help you again, and we shall have nothing to do with each other from now on, he said indignantly. With that, he left at once, not sparing a look at Luke again. Not expecting Taylor to turn his back on him so quickly, Luke rolled his eyes. You're not the only person I could find. I can get 1,000 people to help me. He is all sizzle and no steak. Luke turned and walked over to those people in the offices he had rubbed shoulders with earlier. But as soon as they saw him, they dispersed at once, as if afraid of being associated with him. Not giving up, he tried to approach a few more, but they all reacted just like those people earlier, all avoided him like the plague. I can't believe it. Luke stood where he was, looking with resentment at Sean and Steve, who were talking to Sebastian. Why did things turn out to be not what I expected? Not daring to show his anger at Sebastian, he had no choice but to glare at Sean and Steve. It must be the Riddle family's fault. They must have struck a deal with Sebastian secretly. Otherwise, I wouldn't have lost with my perfect preparation. Luke took out his mobile phone and made a call, shouting angrily into the phone, "What the hell is going on? Didn't you say you made a deal with Mr. Wyance? Why did we still lose?" Meanwhile, in a beauty center, Joyce McCarthy, Luke's daughter, sat up and asked the beautician to step aside with the wave of a hand, then said in disbelief, "I have talked to Martin several times. He promised me that and no way we would have lost." Joyce and Martin were colleagues and sort of the best partners in the hospital. She had inadvertently mentioned the family land with him before, and Martin had said that he would talk to his father. Could it be that Martin lied to me? Or did you actually forget about it, and he did not talk to his father at all? Joyce hung up after having a few words with Luke. She took off the mask on her face and angrily called Martin to question him. What the hell is going on with you, Martin? Haven't you promised me we would let our family win? She was pissed with a take-for-granted attitude, completely having no self-awareness that she was asking Martin for a favor. Martin was tired as he had just finished performing surgery in the hospital. So he had no patience for this and scolded her angrily. What's the matter with you? You'd better not call me again if this is why you called. Joyce had never been yelled at by him like this. She was stunned in belief for a moment and then sobbed. Martin, how could you yell at me? You yelled at me. Have you forgotten you promised me in the first place? Martin kneaded his temples as Joyce's shrill gave him a headache. I remember I've talked to my dad. Let me check with him. Then he hung up, wanting to call his father. Just then, his mobile phone rang, and the caller ID on the screen showed it was a race club. He answered the call impatiently, but what the other side told him pleasantly surprised him. You found the owner of car number 6? Who is IT? As the person at the other end read out the name in the register, Martin was surprised again. Nicole Riddle? Not only the person's family name was Riddle, but it also was a woman. Something suddenly dawned on him, and he quickly called his father. Sebastian had just finished discussing with Sean and Steve and was happy with the idea of these two young people. Had he known the ideas of these two people in the first round, he would not have dismissed Damien and Dylan. Looking at the vibrating phone in his hand, he patted the two on the shoulders and gently excused himself. Martin heard his father's voice and could not control his emotion. Dad, I remember mentioning to you that the daughter of the McCarthy family is my colleague. Why did you let the Riddle family win the tender? But this aside, I wonder if you know a person called Nicole Riddle? I think I've heard you mention her before. Sebastian heard the name and frowned. I told you before, she is the top gemologist from Hustruberg who has helped me before. Have you forgotten? I can't believe that it's her. I even didn't expect that she was into racing. She was the owner of car number 6 that we watched together the other day. Martin was surprised when he heard this. He had a feeling that she was the person who had helped him fix Marie and Solomon. He did not wait for Sebastian to continue. Since you know her, do you know if she is in any way related to the Riddle family? Sebastian looked at Sean and Steve and smiled. You're right, she is indeed from the Riddle family. Martin froze, and after a long moment, he muttered with chagrin, Damn it, Joyce. Then he continued in a feeble voice. Dad, you are right. Let those who deserve to win. Forget about what I said earlier. The line went dead, and Sebastian frowned gently with the phone still in his hand. He turned to look at the two handsome young men across from him and smiled. Shall we move on to the handover procedure? He asked. Nicole returned to the Royal Creek Institute, and as she was just about to turn around and walk toward the cafe, she heard an extraordinarily emotional voice coming from behind her. Boss. She looked back and saw Austin running quickly toward her with a few people. People who thought of coming up to Nicole to ask something quickly ducked aside when they saw Austin. They wondered why Austin always appeared around Nicole. They were even curious about the relationship between Nicole and Sebastian, wanting to come over and ask Nicole about it. But because of Austin's presence, they did not get a chance to do so. Austin did not care what was going on in the minds of those people. He came up to Nicole excitedly. Boss, how was your exam? Nicole raised an eyebrow, not knowing which exam he was talking about, but it did not make a difference to her. It was okay. Austin knew his boss had always been low-key. Even if she was the first in the entire school, she would not get carried away, so he did not ask her much about it. Boss, I could answer all the questions in the monthly exam I took today, he said excitedly. Sammy and others behind him were beaming, looking at Nicole with gratitude in their eyes. Had it not been for Nicole giving them high-intensity, special training for over half a month, they would not have performed so well on the exam. They never imagined the exams that they had always struggled with could one day become a place where they were in their element. Many of the people around, who had not gone far, heard what Austin said and also stumbled. Is that a joke, or are we hallucinating? Austin said he did well in the test. They cast a questioning and mocking eye over Nicole, but she ignored them. She looked at the boys in front of her and smiled gently. Well done, she said. Her smile was as beautiful as the first sunbeam glistening on the dew. Everyone was awestruck. Austin looked at his boss, scratching his head with a simper. By the time I reach the top 20, Nicole would be my boss, he thought to himself. The weather grew colder in October. They chuckled, wanting to find a place to eat. Nicole thought for a moment and thought of asking June, Lulu, and Bradley out. The more the people, the merrier, she thought. Besides, she had promised to treat them to dinner. Since the monthly exam was over, Lulu and others quickly came out. Among them was Jimmy, whom Nicole had not seen for a long time. He let out a shy smile when he saw Nicole. Nicole gave him a friendly nod. As they all walked out happily, Lulu suggested going to the fondue restaurant where Nicole had brought them to last time. Everyone agreed. It was the best weather for steaming fondue. Everyone enjoyed it, and many of them even proposed to drink. Nicole did not want to kill their buzz, so she agreed. After all, the youngest one here was also an adult. Drinking was completely legal. Lulu took a sip of the beer as Jimmy looked on. Her face flushed, and she stood up wobbly and said slowly, "Do you know it will be our school's centennial celebration soon? I heard that every college is going to give a performance. The student union has put up a notice that the Royal Creek Institute's major performance is actually a drama. It is said that auditions will be held throughout the school, and it is open for all, regardless of grades." Nicole was not interested in such a thing. She pressed down Lulu's hand, which was holding a drink to her mouth. "That's enough for today." Lulu grinned and put down the wine glass in her hand when she saw it was Nicole. Jimmy looked at his sister in amazement, not expecting her to listen to Nicole even though she had drunk so much. June covered her mouth and smiled as if she also thought Lulu was cute. "Do you know why they want to have stage plays?" Lulu might have put down her wine glass, but she never stopped talking. She looked around mysteriously for a while before finally speaking. "Because Lukewarm Crew is already preparing to restart filming. They are planning to search for a female lead in colleges and universities. It is said that Lloyd will come to the Royal Creek Institute's anniversary and watch the stage play." "What?" Bradley was the first to stand up. He had drunk a lot. He looked at Lulu with glowing eyes and asked in some disbelief, "Did you just say Lloyd would come?" Lulu nodded. She had heard it from the student union and thought it must be true. Probably the news would spread throughout the Royal Creek Institute the day after tomorrow. Austin was dizzy, as he also had one too many. "Who is Lloyd?" "Wait a minute, did you say Lloyd Holder?" he said in a confused manner. He had not only seen Lloyd on the screen but, more importantly, had heard his father mention him. "He is more than just a movie star." Everyone looked at Austin, not sure why he was so excited to hear Lloyd's name. They wondered if Austin was also Lloyd's fan, not expecting that from a stout guy like Austin. So they all laughed at him. Lloyd's charisma is indeed unstoppable. Austin heard the ridicule and flushed with anger. He immediately banged on the table and stood up, shouting angrily, "What the hell are you all talking about? My dad asked me to leave Lloyd alone, just as he had asked me to come over and apologize to the boss." The Woods family might be like a fearless scoundrel in Northon, but the fact that they could survive till this day meant that they most probably had access to the most reliable intel. That was why everyone looked at each other and was dumbfounded upon hearing what Austin had said. Is Lloyd really someone with a background? Bradley was the first to give a reaction. He looked at Austin and dismissed it by waving his hand casually. "I don't care what background Lloyd has, I just like him as a person." Lulu was also attracted to Lloyd's personality and charm and did not care who he really was. So she nodded and said, "To be honest, we probably never get a chance to get up close and personal with Lloyd." Austin scratched his head and sat back down with embarrassment. "Yeah, I agreed." He had lost control of himself for a moment when they all laughed at him for being a fan of Lloyd just now. "Lloyd is still a distance from us. I wonder who he will select during the school anniversary this time." June said softly, turning her head to look at Nicole and smiling. "I think Nicole stands a good chance." What she said drew attention, and people were looking at Nicole, who was sitting casually on the side. "Exactly. Nicole is the prettiest girl at the Royal Creek Institute. The role of the heroine suits her." Sammy could not help but whisper to Nicole, "Boss, will you go to the audition for this play?" Seeing all eyes on her, Nicole looked at Sammy. "I'm not going." Everyone sighed, and a few of them, who did not know Nicole well, did not find her reply surprising though regrettable.
Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.